Jalen had always known his neighborhood wasn't a place for the faint-hearted. The streets of Ashford had seen to many broken promises and shattered dreams, and he was just one more kid trying to survive the chaos. The constant hum of sirens and the whispered warnings from his elders had shaped his childhood. But Jalen, at the age of 18, had made a silent promise to himself he wouldn't fall into the traps that claimed so many around him. On that particular day, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks. The air was thick with heat, and the distant sounds of street vendors trying to sell their goods. Jalen was walking home from school, earbuds in, trying to block out the noise of the world around him. He had his head down, mind focused on the future, a future that seemed impossible to imagine in the midst of all the violence and despair. College applications Saturday in his backpack, and a part of him held on to that dream, even if it seemed like a long shot. But today, fate had other plans. Jalen's walk was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a car screeching to a halt. He pulled his earbuds out and glanced up, noticing the commotion a few feet ahead. A police officer, alone and seemingly caught off guard, was trying to keep a suspect pinned to the ground. The man was huge, his arms bulging with muscle, and he struggled fiercely against the officer's grip. Jalen recognized the officers immediately. He was Detective Harris, the same officers who had patrolled the neighborhood for years. She was known for her toughness, often getting into the roughest situations without flinching. But this was different. Harris was pregnant, visibly showing, and Jalen could see the strain on her face as the suspect's violent resistance escalated. The man, now enraged, managed to break free from her hold. He shoved Harris aside, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. Jalen's heart raced. The sight of her, struggling and vulnerable, made something inside him snap. He hadn't planned on getting involved, but instinct took over. Without thinking, Jalen sprinted toward the scene, his sneakers pounding against the pavement. He grabbed a discarded pipe from a nearby construction site, using it to swing at the suspect. Catching him off guard, the man grunted in pain, staggering back. "Hey, get off her!" Jalen shouted, adrenaline fueling his voice. The suspect turned, eyes wide with anger, but before he could make a move, Jalen swung the pipe again, knocking it against his side. In a moment of confusion, Harris, still on the ground, managed to grab her radio and call for backup. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, but the danger wasn't over. The suspect was now charging at Jalen with a fury that threatened to overwhelm him. Jalen's grip tightened on the pipe, his mind racing for a way out of this. Suddenly, a shot rang out, piercing the air and freezing everyone in place. Jalen's heart stopped as the suspect stumbled, blood splattering from a wound in his shoulder. Detective Harris, who had somehow regained her composure, stood up shakily, her hand still holding the gun she had pulled from her holster. The suspect cursed and fell to his knees before collapsing onto the ground. "Get out of here, kid!" Harris barked, her voice hoarse, "before you get yourself killed." Jalen stood frowning, his body still wired with adrenaline. He couldn't quite process what had just happened. He'd saved her, but in the process, he could have easily ended up dead. Harris looked at him, her gaze hard and calculating. She was a seasoned officer, but something in her eyes softened. "You okay?" she asked, but there was a moment of hesitation, as if she wasn't sure if she should be grateful or angry. Jalen nodded, still panting from the rush of action. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied shortly, holstering her gun and taking a moment to steady herself. "But this isn't a game. You could have gotten yourself killed. And for what? A pregnant cop in trouble." Her tone was more tired than reprimanding. Jalen didn't know what to say. He had acted on instinct, driven by the idea that someone had to step up, and in that moment, he couldn't sit back and watch her get hurt. As the sirens grew louder, Harris moved quickly to secure the scene. As backup arrived, Jalen lingered at the edge of the crowd, unsure of what to do next. He had saved her, but in the process, he felt like he'd just stepped into something much bigger than himself, something that was bigger than his neighborhood, his family, or his future, something that could change everything. And he had no idea just how much his decision would cost him, or how it would come to save his entire family. Jalen hadn't expected much after saving Detective Harris. He figured the media would blow things out of proportion, that people would say he was just in the right place at the right time, or worse, treat it like a passing news cycle. But what he hadn't anticipated was the way it would turn his life upside down. Within hours of the incident, Jalen's face was plastered on every local news channel. Headlines screamed about the heroic teen who saved a pregnant officer, and cameras caught his every move as the story spread like wildfire. People in his neighborhood, who had known him as just another kid trying to get by, started treating him differently. Some saw him as a symbol of hope, a rare glimpse of good emerging from the chaos. Others saw him as a pawn in a larger game, a kid who didn't know what he was getting into. Jalen, my boy, Mr. Turner, the local convenience store owner, greeted him with a handshake that was more like a bear hug. You're making us proud. Heroic actions. Man, you got the whole block talking. Jalen forced a smile, but inside, he felt uncomfortable. The attention was overwhelming. Everyone seemed to expect something from him now. It wasn't just about the media. It was about the people who had known him forever, seeing him in a new light. They had no idea what it had cost him to step in. And then there were the whispers. You see that kid? The one who helped the cop. People would murmur as he walked by. I heard he's gotta be somebody. You think he'll get out of here? Jalen didn't know how to answer those questions. He didn't even know if he could escape Ashford. The neighborhood had its grip on him, and no matter how many people talked about his bravery, he still had to face the truth. His family was falling apart. When he arrived home that evening, the tension in the air was palpable. His mother, Angela, was sitting at the kitchen table, her face a mask of worry. Her hands were folded, and her eyes kept darting to the door as if waiting for someone to walk in. Mom, what's going on? Jalen asked, closing the door behind him. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gestured for him to sit down. Jalen took a seat, feeling a sense of unease. It wasn't like her to be so quiet. I'm worried, Jalen, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know what's been happening in the streets, and I know you're caught up in something bigger than what you can handle. Jalen's heart sank. He knew exactly where this conversation was headed. His mom had always been protective, but this time, there was more to it than just the usual warnings. She had seen the news, heard the reports about him saving the officers, and now she was scared. Mom, I'm fine. I wasn't trying to. She cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. I'm not worried about the headlines, Jalen. I'm worried about the people who will see you as a target. The Gens, the ones who will think you've got something they want. Jalen frowned. The Gens, Mom, your brother? She interrupted, her voice breaking. Your brother is getting mixed up in that world, Jalen, and I can't keep him from it. His stomach twisted. His younger brother, Malik, had always been a handful, but he hadn't known things had gotten so bad. Malik was only 16, still a kid in a lot of ways, but the streets had been pulling him in for months. Jalen had tried to talk to him, tried to steer him away from that life, but Malik had always shrugged him off. Where is he now? Jalen asked, his mind racing. Angela's eyes filled with hushed tears. He's out there, running with them. I tried to keep him home, but he's been sneaking out at night. I don't know how to stop him. Jalen stood up, pacing back and forth. He wanted to be angry, but more than anything, he felt helpless. He couldn't save Malik from the life that was already pulling him in. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Jalen's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure if it was someone from the neighborhood or a reporter looking for a story. But when he opened it, he was surprised to find Detective Harris standing on the other side. Detective Harris? Jalen blinked, not expecting her to show up at his house. I need to talk to you, Jalen, she said, her voice steady but urgent. She looked past him at Angela, who was now standing at the edge of the kitchen. Mind if I come in? Jalen stepped aside, and Harris walked in without waiting for permission. She wasn't here for pleasantries. Jalen could see that. She wasn't even in uniform anymore, just a plain black jacket and jeans, but her presence was still commending. I saw what happened today. You did the right thing, she began, her gaze meeting his with a sense of seriousness he hadn't expected. But I need to know you're serious about what comes next. There are people who won't take kindly to your interference. Jalen frowned. What are you talking about? Harris stepped closer, lowering her voice. The man you helped me take down. He wasn't just some thug off the street. He's tied to a bigger operation. And now, because of you, they'll be looking for retaliation. It's not just about you anymore, Jalen. They'll be looking at your family too. Jalen's heart pounded. His eyes locked onto Harris's, and for the first time, he realized just how deep he'd gotten into something he couldn't control. I need you to stay safe, Harris continued, and keep your head down. And I need you to talk to Malik. The gains aren't going to stop because of one lucky break. Jalen swallowed hard. This was bigger than he thought, much bigger, but if he didn't act now, it might cost him everything. The tension in the air lingered long, After Detective Harris left his house, Jalen couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something dangerous, and he had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. He couldn't ignore his mother's worries, nor could he forget Harris's warning. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his actions had set off a chain reaction, and now he had to figure out how to navigate the storm. Later that evening, Jalen Saturday at the kitchen table, replaying everything that had happened earlier. His mom had gone to bed early, exhausted from the weight of her own fears. Malik, as usual, was nowhere to be found. The only sound in the house was the occasional creak of the floorboards, a constant reminder of the silence that had fallen between them. Jalen knew he had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and let things spiral out of control, especially with Malik getting deeper into trouble. But what could he do? The more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't have the answers. He wasn't a hero, just a kid who had gotten caught up in something far bigger than himself. The ringing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wondered if it was the gangs looking for him. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Jalen." Harris's voice came through, low but urgent. "I need to talk to you. It's about Malik." Jalen frowned. "What about Malik?" "I know where he is," Harris said, her tone sharp. "He's been spotted at a house on 12th and Elm. It's one of the gang safe houses. I'm telling you this because I'm not sure he knows what he's getting into. He's in danger, Jalen, and if you don't get to him soon, he could end up like the rest of them." Jalen felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. His little brother, the one he had always protected, was walking right into the heart of the chaos he had spent his whole life avoiding. Harris's words hit him hard, but they also fueled something inside him, a fierce determination to save Malik before it was too late. "I'm on my way," Jalen said without hesitation. He didn't know what he was going to do once he got there, but he knew he couldn't let Malik fall deeper into the grip of the gang. Jalen grabbed his jacket, heart pounding in his chest, and stepped out into the night. The streets of Ashford were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like something was about to break. As he walked toward 12th and Elm, Jalen's thoughts were a whirlwind. What if Harris was right? What if Malik had already gone too far to turn back? The guilt weighed heavy on his shoulders. He had been so focused on his own future, his own escape from the neighborhood, that he hadn't noticed the way Malik had been slipping away. The boy who used to follow him around, asking for advice, now seemed like a stranger. Jalen felt like he was failing as an older brother. When he reached the corner of 12th and Elm, he spotted the rundown house Harris had mentioned. The windows were boarded up, the door cracked open just enough for someone to slip inside. Jalen hesitated, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but the urgency in his chest pushed him forward. He crept closer, careful not to make any noise. The last thing he wanted was to alert the people inside that he was here. As he reached the door, he paused, listening. Voices drifted out from within, low, menacing tones. Jalen's heart thudded in his ears. He knew he had to act fast. Just as he was about to push the door open, he heard a familiar voice from inside. "Yo, you sure this is the kid who saved the cop? Man, I thought he was just some scared little runner." Jalen's breath caught in his throat. The voice was unmistakable. "Malik." "Don't matter," another voice replied. "He's a target now. He gets in the way. He's gotta pay." Jalen's blood ran cold. He knew what that meant. The gangs didn't take kindly to anyone interfering with their business, especially not a kid who had disrupted their operations. He had no choice. He had to get Malik out of there, now. He pushed the door open with a quiet creak and stepped inside, his body tense, ready for anything. The room was dimly lit, filled with the acrid smell of smoke and sweat. The gang members were sitting around a table, but they were distracted, talking among themselves. Malik was sitting in the corner, looking out of place. He looked up when he saw Jalen enter, his expression filled with confusion and something else, a flicker of fear. "Jalen," Malik's voice was shaky. "What are you doing here?" Jalen stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You need to come with me, Malik, now." One of the gang members, a bulky guy with a scar running down his face, turned toward them. "What's this? Little man, you think you can just waltz in here and take your brother?" Jalen felt the weight of the situation. He was outnumbered, but he couldn't back down. "I'm taking him out of here, and if you got a problem with that, we can handle it." The gang members stood up, closing in on him, but before anything could escalate, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "Enough!" Detective Harris stepped into the light, her gun in hand, but not raised. The tension in the room shifted. The gang members frowned, recognizing her immediately. "You don't want to mess with me. Not tonight," Harris said, her voice cold and commanding. "This kid's off limits. Take a step back, and I'll make sure you all get to walk out of here." The room was silent for a long moment before the gang members muttered under their breath. Reluctantly backing off, Jalen pulled Malik to his feet, pulling him toward the door. "Come on, Malik, let's go." Malik shot a nervous glance at the gang, then at Harris. "What's going on, Jalen? What's she doing here?" "I'll explain later," Jalen said, his tone final. "But we're leaving now. No questions." As they stepped outside, the weight of what had just happened began to settle over Jalen. He had saved Malik, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the gang came after him again. The danger wasn't over. But for now, at least, they were safe, and Jalen had made an unlikely ally in the process, someone who knew exactly what it meant to survive in a world like this. The ride home was silent. Malik Saturday in the passenger seat of Harris's unmarked police car, his eyes darting nervously between the rearview mirror and the empty street ahead. Jalen was in the back, his mind racing. The encounter with the gang members had left him shaken, but the fact that Harris had stepped in to help was still surreal. He had never imagined he'd be in a position where he was relying on a police officers for anything, let alone one who had a hand in saving his life. "You okay?" Harris asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it that made Jalen uneasy. Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just don't get what you're doing here." "You saved us." His voice cracked slightly, as though he still couldn't quite believe it. Harris glanced in the rearview mirror at Malik. "I'm not here to save you, Malik. I'm here because you're walking down a dangerous path, and I don't want to see you end up like so many others in this neighborhood." Her eyes flicked to Jalen in the back seat. "And your brother isn't the only one in danger. Jalen, you've gotten yourself caught in something bigger than you realize." Jalen shifted uncomfortably, his heart sinking. He had a sinking feeling that things were going to get much worse before they got better. They reached his house in near silence. Jalen was the first to get out, his mind still clouded with everything that had happened. He led Malik inside, and Harris followed them to the door, but she didn't enter. "Just remember, I'm not doing this out of kindness," Harris said, her tone steady but serious. "This is about making sure you just stay alive. The streets don't forgive, and neither do the people pulling the strings. You can't get out just by trying to be a hero. Jalen, you need to make the right choices for both your lives." Before Jalen could respond, she turned and left, her car pulling away into the darkness. Inside, Malik sank into the couch, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "What's her deal? She barely knows us, and now she's acting like she's our guardian angel or something." Jalen rubbed his temples, trying to push the frustration away. "She's right, though. You've been putting yourself in danger. Malik, you think the gangs are just gonna let you walk away? You're too deep." Malik glared at him. "I'm not a kid. Jalen, I know what I'm doing. You don't have to tell me." Jalen clenched his fists. "You don't know what you're doing. Man, you think you're just playing in the game, but there's no out once you're in. I've seen it happen to many people." Malik scoffed and stood up, pacing across the small living room. "And what? You think you're better than me? You're not even trying to understand. This is the only way out of this place. You think the cops care about us? You think Harris cares?" Jalen's chest tightened. His brother's anger was palpable, and it hit close to home. He could see how deep Malik was in his own internal battle, trying to prove he wasn't weak, that he had control over his life. "I get it," Jalen said, his voice low, "but there's more at stake than just you and me. This place, these streets, they don't give second chances. I don't want to see you end up like Dad." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and immediately he regretted it. Malik frowned. The mention of their father, who had walked out on the family years ago, hit a nerve. They never talked about him, never mentioned the way he had abandoned them. "Don't bring him into this, Jalen," Malik snapped, his voice harsh. "Don't use him as an excuse for everything that's wrong with this life." Jalen took a step back, realizing that bringing up their father had only made things worse. He wasn't sure what was going on in Malik's mind anymore, but his younger brother's resentment was clear. "I'm just trying to protect you," Jalen said softly. "We don't have to end up like him. We don't have to make the same mistakes, but it's not gonna happen if you keep pushing me away." The room fell silent. Jalen could feel the weight of everything hanging between them, a rift widening in the space that had once felt like home. Malik finally slumped back onto the couch, his expression softer now. I don't want to end up like him either, but I don't know what else to do. Jalen, I can't just sit here and let the world swallow me whole. Jalen nodded. He understood more than Malik knew, but right now, he wasn't sure if his brother was ready to listen to what he had to say. The world outside was so much bigger than both of them, and it was closing in fast. The sound of a knock at the door broke the tension. Jalen exchanged a quick glance with Malik before heading to the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to find Detective Harris standing there again, her expression even more serious than before. I need to talk to both of you, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She wasn't here to play nice. Jalen braced himself. Whatever she had to say, he knew it wouldn't be good. Harris took a deep breath and looked directly at both of them. You're already on their radar, Jalen. The Gens, I mean, and if you think what happened tonight is just a blip, you're wrong. They're already making moves, and now they're targeting your family. You don't have much time. Jalen's stomach dropped. What do you mean, targeting my family? The people you care about, your mom, Malik, anyone connected to you, they're all in danger. The gang you crossed tonight, they don't take kindly to threats, and now, you're one of theirs. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Jalen turned to Malik, who had gone pale, his earlier defiance replaced with fear. Harris's next words were more urgent. I'm giving you a choice, Jalen. You can either work with me, and we'll protect you, but it's going to take more than just being a good kid. You're going to have to get your hands dirty, or you can go it alone, but I won't be able to help you when things get worse. And believe me, they will. Jalen stood frowning, unsure of how to respond. In that moment, he realized something. His life would never be the same again. No matter the choice, he was already too far gone. Jalen stood in the doorway, his mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. The weight of Harris's words hung heavily in the air. The thought of working with the police, even if it meant saving his family, felt like a betrayal to everything he had grown up with. In the world he knew, cops were enemies. They weren't allies. But now, Harris was offering him a way out, a chance to protect his loved ones from the danger that was closing in on them. The silence stretched on as Jalen tried to make sense of it all. His mother, who had been sitting quietly in the kitchen, was now at the door, her eyes scanning Harris warily. She wasn't sure what to think of the officers, but she could sense the urgency in the room. You need to make a decision, Jalen, Harris said, breaking the silence. This isn't something you can put off. The longer you wait, the worse it'll get. You're in the thick of it now. Jalen's mind was racing. He thought about Malik, about how lost he seemed. He thought about his mom, the constant worry she carried on her shoulders. And then there was his own fear, the fear of what might happen if he took the wrong step, if he couldn't handle what was coming for him and his family. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, Jalen said, his voice low, almost to himself. What if I can't do what you're asking me to do? Harris regarded him with a calm intensity. You don't have a choice. You think you can just walk away from all of this, from the gang trying to take you down, from the world you're living in? Her eyes softened, but only slightly. I know you want to protect your family. I'm giving you a chance to do that, but it's going to take more than just standing back and hoping it'll all blow over. Jalen's thoughts swirled. His life had never been easy, but this was different. This was a crossroads, a point of no return. His instinct screamed at him to run, to leave Ashford behind and start fresh, far from everything that had trapped him. But deep down, he knew that wasn't an option. The danger wasn't just in the streets. It was at his doorstep, breathing down his neck. Malik, who had been standing by quietly, finally spoke up, his voice shaky. What do you mean? Get my hands dirty. What does that even mean? He sounded desperate, like he was grasping for some kind of control in a world that felt like it was slipping away. Harris turned her attention to Malik, her gaze steady. I'm talking about getting information, about being someone who can help us take them down. It's not just about surviving, Malik. It's about fighting back. Malik shook his head, his frustration mounting. I don't know what you're asking me. I'm not a rat. Jalen watched his brother's face twist with anger and confusion. He understood where Malik was coming from. No one in Ashford wanted to be seen as a snitch. It was the ultimate betrayal in their world. But if they didn't act, if they didn't make a choice, the consequences would be worse than anything they could imagine. We don't have to do this alone, Jalen said quietly, his voice full of a newfound resolve. I'm not saying it's easy, but if we don't fight back, we're as good as dead. Malik's eyes flickered to Jalen, his expression uncertain. You're really going to do this? Jalen nodded. I don't have a choice. Harris gave them both a hard look before speaking again. There's no turning back once you step in, but if you're ready to protect your family, we'll be there to back you up. Just know that what you're about to do is more than just surviving. It's taking a stand. Jalen's breath hitched as he looked at his brother, then his mother. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the fear that mirrored his own, but there was also something else, something stronger, a sense of duty, a need to protect the ones he loved. He made his decision. I'll do it, Jalen said firmly. I'll work with you. I'll do whatever it takes. Harris nodded, her eyes narrowing. Good, then we need to move fast. I'll have someone meet you at the station tomorrow. We'll go over the plan. Jalen exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. His mind was still a mess, but something in him had clicked. The world he had once known was slipping away, and in its place, something darker, more dangerous, was taking shape. But now, he had a chance to fight for the people he loved. As Harris turned to leave, she paused at the door. You've made the right choice, Jalen, but be prepared. The people we're up against don't play by any rules, and if you get too close to them, you may find it's harder to walk away than you think. Jalen watched her walk out, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The silence in the house was deafening now. He turned to Malik, who was still sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. This isn't going to be easy, Jalen said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of determination and regret. But we're going to get through this. We have to. Malik didn't respond immediately. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do it, Jalen. Jalen sat down beside him, his arm around his younger brother's shoulders. We're in this together. You don't have to do it alone. The two of them sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the decision heavy on their hearts. Jalen didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Things had changed. They couldn't go back to the way things were. But now, for the first time in a long time, Jalen felt like he had a chance to protect his family, to protect Malik, even if it meant crossing a line he never thought he'd have to cross. The next day felt surreal. Jalen barely slept the night before, his mind constantly running through every possible outcome. The weight of his decision was heavy, and every time he closed his eyes, he could see the faces of the gang members from the night before, their eyes cold and unforgiving. There was no turning back now. He walked to the local police station early, just as Harris had instructed. The morning air was cold, the streets eerily quiet, as though the road itself was holding its breath. As Jalen approached the building, his heart pounded in his chest, his nerves crawling. He didn't know what to expect, didn't know who he would meet or what he would be asked to do, but he knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. Inside the station, Jalen was led to a small, sterile room in the back, where Harris was waiting with a man Jalen had never seen before. The man looked to be in his early 40s, with a sharp, calculating expression. His uniform was crisp, but the deep lines etched into his face spoke volumes about the kind of work he did. He wasn't just a cop, he was someone who had lived through the darkest sides of the law. This is Officer Daniels, Harris introduced him, her voice steady. He'll be working with you. Daniels nodded curtly, his sharp eyes appraising Jalen as if measuring his worth. You made the right choice, he said, his tone flat but not unkind. But you should know this won't be easy, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. If you're not sure about this, now's the time to back out. Jalen met his gaze, the intensity of the moment sinking in. He had no plans to back out, not now, not after everything that had happened. He couldn't back down. I'm in, Jalen said, his voice firm. Daniels gave him a small nod, then slid a file across the table. We've been tracking the gang you crossed, the one led by a guy named Tyrone Big T Williams. He runs things in this part of town, and he doesn't take kindly to anyone messing with his business. Daniels paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This is who you're dealing with. Jalen opened the file, glancing at the mug shots and names inside. Big T's face stared back at him, a man with a cold, hard glare. There were several other men listed, most of them with lengthy criminal records. The more Jalen looked at the file, the more it hit him just how deep he was in. These weren't just small-time thugs. These were dangerous criminals, people who didn't hesitate to kill anyone who got in their way. So what now? Jalen asked, trying to steady his nerves. We need information, Harris answered. We need to know where Big T is hiding, who his suppliers are, where the gang operates. That's where you come in. Jalen frowned. You want me to spy on them, to get close to them? Daniels leaned in slightly, his voice slow but intense. You're not just getting close to them. You're going to have to earn their trust. You need to work with them, help them with their operations. We need to know everything, every shipment, every meeting, every safe house. This is how we bring them down. Jalen's stomach turned. The idea of getting involved in their business, helping them out, felt wrong. But if he didn't do it, if he didn't get that information they needed, the gang would come after him and his family. His mom, Malik, they would be targets, and Jalen couldn't let that happen. I'll do it, Jalen said, his voice shaky but determined. I'll do whatever it takes. Harris gave him a nod of approval, but there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. It's not just about getting close to them. It's about surviving once you're in. You'll need to be smart. Jalen, if you do one thing wrong, you're dead. Daniel stood up, his gaze locking onto Jalen. Remember, we're not asking you to be a hero. We're asking you to gather intel, to survive. You're in the game now, and once you're in, it's a whole different world. Keep your head down, stay calm, and don't draw attention. And whatever you do, don't get attached. Jalen nodded slowly. He was starting to understand what they meant. This wasn't about being brave or doing the right thing. It was about making sure he got out alive, no matter what it took. Do you have a way to contact us? Harris asked. Jalen looked up, confused. You need to stay in touch. If anything goes wrong, we need to know immediately. Right, Jalen said, his mind still reeling. He was in deeper than he had ever thought possible. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Take this, Harris said, handing him a burner phone. It's for our communication. Don't use it for anything else. If you need us, you contact us through that. Jalen pocketed the phone, the weight of it a constant reminder of the dangerous road ahead. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. After the meeting, Harris and Daniels left, leaving Jalen alone in the small room. The reality of what he was about to do began to sink in. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about becoming part of the very thing he had spent his life trying to avoid. He had to play their game if he wanted to win, but at what cost? As Jalen walked out of the station, his mind raced. The streets felt different now. The shadows seemed darker, the air thicker. It was like he was entering a world that had always been there, just waiting for him to cross that line. He had made his decision, but now the real test began. He had entered the fire. The next few days felt like a blur. Jalen kept his head down, trying to avoid the familiar eyes that always seemed to be watching. He wasn't used to moving in the shadows, but now it was his only option. Every step felt like it could be his last. The gang was everywhere. They moved in and out of Ashford like they owned the place, and Jalen knew it was only a matter of time before he was forced to confront them head-on. But for now, he had to play his part, pretend to be one of them. On the third day after his meeting with Harris and Daniels, Jalen received the call. The voice on the other end was gravelly, the sound of a street corner in the background. You want in? It was a question, but it didn't sound like one. Jalen's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. I'm in, he replied, his voice steady but betraying a hint of uncertainty. There was a pause on the line. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th and Elm. You better be ready. The line went dead. Jalen stood frowning for a moment, his hand still gripping the phone. The weight of what he had just agreed to hit him harder than he expected. He had no idea what to expect at the warehouse. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about gathering information. It was about survival. He had left his house, not bothering to tell Malik or his mom where he was going. They didn't need to know. This was something Jalen had to do on his own. The cold air bit at his skin as he walked, his mind racing, his heart hammered in his chest, and his breath came out in shallow gasps. He had made the decision to work with the police, but now he had to prove he was one of them. And in this world, that meant doing whatever it took to stay alive. The old warehouse loomed ahead as Jalen reached the corner of 5th and Elm. The rusted metal walls, the broken windows, and the decaying building screamed danger. He could hear voices and footsteps from inside, and his gut twisted. This was the heart of the gang's operation, and stepping inside meant he was fully in. He took a deep breath and pushed through the creaky door. The warehouse was dimly lit, shadows crawling across the cracked concrete floor. A few men lingered near the back, talking in low voices. When they saw him, their eyes narrowed, sizing him up. Who the hell are you? One of them asked, stepping forward. His voice was rough, his frame imposing. Jalen swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. I'm here to help. The man raised an eyebrow. Help? You don't look like the kind of guy who wants to help us. Jalen kept his voice steady. I'm serious. I want in. I got skills. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Jalen's face. For a moment, Jalen thought he was about to get a feast to the gut, but then the man chuckled. "Well, you're in luck," the man said, nodding toward the back of the warehouse. "Big T's waiting for you." Jalen's stomach dropped. He had heard about Big T, but this was his first real encounter with the man who controlled everything. He followed the thud through the maze of crates and boxes, every step feeling heavier than the last. At the far end of the warehouse, a large office had been set up in the back. The door was slightly ajar, and Jalen could see the figure of Big T sitting behind a desk. His back turned, the man exuded power, every inch of him an intimidating presence. His massive frame filled the room, and the air seemed to thicken just by his presence. "Come in," Big T's deep voice rumbled. "Let's see what you got." Jalen hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The door slammed shut behind him, and he found himself face to face with the most dangerous man in the city. Big T turned in his chair, his cold eyes sizing Jalen up. "You look like a deer caught in headlights. You sure about this? You really want to work for me?" Jalen swallowed, trying to keep his composure. "I'm sure. I've got what you need. I can help you move your product, keep your business running smooth." Big T leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a grin. "You think you can handle the heat? This isn't a game, kid. You get into deep, and you don't come out." "I can handle it," Jalen said, his voice growing more confident. "I've been around. I know how things work." Big T studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'm gonna give you a shot. But understand this, you screw up, and there's no going back. You're gonna work for me, and you're gonna keep your mouth shut. You want out, there's a door, but once you step in, you're mine." Jalen nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He was already too deep to back out. This wasn't just about making a quick buck anymore. It was about his survival, and the survival of the people he cared about. Big T stood up, his towering presence looming over Jalen. "Get to work," he ordered. "There's no time to waste." As Jalen turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was slipping further out of his control. He had crossed into enemy territory. There was no going back now. Jalen's first few days with the gang were a whirlwind of chaos, tension, and unfamiliar territory. He had to prove himself over and over again, doing menial tasks that kept him in the shadows. But as the days passed, Big T started to trust him. Little by little, his orders became more important, the risks higher. Jalen was no longer just some guy on the sidelines. He was in the game now. The warehouse became his second home. The sound of crates being lifted, the low hum of conversations about drug shipments and deals, the constant buzz of illegal activity surrounded him. He wasn't sure if he was getting used to it, or if he was just numbing himself to the horror of it all. Either way, there was no turning back. Every time he walked through the warehouse, he was reminded of the choice he had made and the cost. On the fourth day, Big T called Jalen into his office again. This time, there was no small talk, no getting to know each other. Big T was all business. "Jalen," Big T began, his voice calm but etched with authority. "I got a job for you." Jalen nodded, his heart racing. He had learned it quickly that when Big T called, it was serious. "There's a shipment coming in tonight," Big T continued. "You'll be part of the crew to handle it. It's risky, but I think you can handle it." Jalen's throat tightened. A shipment. That meant a lot more was on the line than just moving product. "Where's it coming from?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Big T's gaze sharpened. "You'll meet a guy named Rico. He'll bring the shipment. Make sure nothing goes wrong." Jalen nodded, trying to hide the unease creeping up his spine. He had no idea who Rico was, but the way Big T spoke about him made it clear he wasn't someone to be messed with. "Got it," he said. Big T stood and walked around the desk, his large frame casting a shadow over Jalen. "Listen up. You're not just handling this for me. You're proving yourself. You mess up, and you won't get another shot. You get one chance. Make it count." Jalen's mind raced as he left Big T's office. He had never been this close to the inner workings of the gang. A shipment was a big deal, one wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. But he had no choice. He couldn't back out now. When he arrived at the designated meeting spot later that night, his stomach churned with nerves. He had been briefed on the details, but nothing prepared him for the reality of the situation. The dark alley behind an old convenience store felt like the perfect spot for a deal to go wrong. A single street light flickered above, casting long shadows on the ground. Jalen's pulse quickened as he scanned the area. He wasn't alone. A few men from the gang were already there, standing in the shadows, their eyes darting around nervously. Jalen joined them, doing his best to blend in. Minutes passed, and his anxiety grew. He could feel the tension in the air, the knowledge that something big was about to happen. Then, a car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jalen's heart skipped a beat. The car came to a stop, and the passenger door opened. A tall, wiry man stepped out. Rico. Jalen's eyes locked onto him. The man had the look of someone who'd seen it all. His clothes were dark, his face hardened by years of violence and crime. He didn't look like someone who cared about anything or anyone, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating, dangerous. Rico approached without saying a word, his eyes scanning the group. Without hesitation, he opened the trunk of the car, revealing stacks of bags wrapped in plastic. The scent of drugs was overpowering, and Jalen's stomach tightened as he realized just how deep into the abyss he was stepping. "This is what we agreed on," Rico said flatly, his voice low. One of the men from the gang stepped forward to inspect the bags, nodding in approval. The deal was going smoothly, but Jalen couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He kept his eyes on Rico, watching every move he made. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. The sound of tires grinding against the asphalt sent a shock of adrenaline through Jalen's body. The men around him tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Before Jalen could react, shots rang out. The deafening crack of gunfire echoed through the alley, and chaos erupted. Men shouted, ducking for cover, their guns drawn. Jalen's heart pounded in his chest as he hit the ground, instinctively reaching for his own gun. This wasn't just a simple exchange anymore, they were under attack. Rico slammed the trunk shut, cursing under his breath. The shots continued to fly, and the men around Jalen scattered, seeking cover behind dumpsters and cars. He was trapped in the middle of the gunfight, unsure who was shooting and why. For a moment, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. Jalen's instincts kicked in, and he moved toward the nearest cover, a dumpster on the side of the alley. He ducked behind it, trying to steady his breath. His hand gripped the gun in his pocket, but he hesitated. It wasn't a killer, not yet. The gunfire slowly began to die down, and Jalen peered out from behind the dumpster. The alley was silent now, the echoes of gunshots lingering in the air like a warning. What the hell just happened? He muttered to himself, his heart racing. The men who had been part of the deal were gone, and Rico was nowhere to be seen. Jalen didn't know if he had survived, or if he'd been caught in the crossfire, but the situation had escalated fast. The question now wasn't whether he could survive the gang's world, it was whether he could make it out alive. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Jalen's heart dropped. The police were coming, and he had to get out fast. The sirens grew louder as Jalen sprinted through the alley, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The reality of the situation hit him all at once. He had just been part of a violent exchange, and now the police were on their way. Everything he'd been working toward, the delicate balance he tried to maintain, was falling apart. His mind raced as he darted into the nearest street, keeping low and trying to blend in with the shadows. The chaos from the gunfire still echoed in his ears, and he couldn't shake the image of the men scattering, of Rico disappearing into the night. Jalen wasn't sure if anyone had been killed, but that wasn't the only thing on his mind. He had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. As he ran, the weight of his decision started to settle over him. When he'd agreed to work with the police, he thought it would be a way to protect his family, to keep them safe. But now, the lines were blurred. Again, the police. Everything was tangled together in a way that made it nearly impossible to see a way out. There was no easy path anymore. Jalen pulled out the burner phone that Harris had given him. He hadn't contacted her since the day at the station, and now, with the police closing in, he knew he had no other choice. He pressed the call button, his fingers trembling. The phone rang once, twice, and then Harris's voice came through the line. "Jalen, where are you?" she asked, her tone sharp with concern. "I'm at the corner of Elm and Fifth," he said, his voice low. "The deal went bad. There was a shootout. I don't know who's still alive. The police are coming." "Stay where you are. We're sending someone to get you," Harris replied, her voice calm but urgent. "We've got your back. Just stay put." Jalen barely had time to respond before the line went dead. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and crouched low behind a row of parked cars. His mind was a storm of thoughts, all competing for his attention. He had crossed a line that, now, seemed impossible to uncross. He didn't know how long he had before the police arrived, but it wouldn't be long. The sirens were growing closer, and Jalen's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced around for any sign of movement. He couldn't afford to be caught. If the police got him, he would never see his family again. If the gang found out what he'd been doing, they wouldn't hesitate to take him out. Just as he was starting to think about making a run for it, a car pulled up across the street, a black sedan. Jalen's eyes widened in recognition. It was Harris's car. The door opened, and Harris herself stepped out, her eyes scanning the area before locking onto him. Without a word, she motioned for him to come over. Jalen didn't hesitate. He ran across the street, diving into the car before the door even fully closed. "Drive!" Harris barked at the driver, who hit the gas without a second thought. The car sped off, and Jalen leaned back, trying to catch his breath. The world outside blurred as they cut through the streets, the sounds of the sirens fading into the distance. Jalen's heart was still racing, but a strange sense of relief washed over him. He was alive, but the question of how long that would last still loomed over him. Harris turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You made it out, but this doesn't end here. We're not done yet." Jalen swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What happens now?" Harris didn't answer right away. She stared out the window for a moment, her face hardening. "Now, we take them down. You've done your part. You gave us what we needed to bring Big T and his gang to the ground." Jalen felt a pang of guilt twist in his stomach. He hadn't exactly been working for the good guys. He had been part of something much darker than he ever imagined. But Harris was right. He had given them the intel they needed, and for that, he could live with himself for now. "We have a plan," Harris continued. "The police are closing in on Big T. It's just a matter of time before we make the bust. But I need you to stay low. Jalen, this isn't over. If you're seen, if anyone finds out you were working with us, they'll come after you and your family." Jalen nodded, his mind spinning. It was a lot to take in, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was finally in control again. As the car raced toward the safe house, Jalen thought about everything he had been through, the streets he had grown up on, the friends he had lost, the choices he had made, both good and bad. He thought about Malik and his mom, the people he loved, and how close he had come to losing them all. There was no going back, not now, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. Harris was right. This wasn't over. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to suffer the way he had. And if he had to risk everything to take down the people who had held his family hostage, then that's exactly what he was going to do. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and obstacles, but for the first time in a long time, Jalen felt like he was on the right path. And this time, he was ready for whatever came next. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends. To subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.